Hello, guys. Welcome to Network Academy Online. My name is Norwin Phillips, and I'll be your instructor for this live session. I, I just wanted to just run through a quick nugget, which will demonstrate to everyone how to configure an Ether channel leveraging packet tracer. So I will not delay. I'll just share my screen and go right into it. All right, so as you can see here, I've actually added to the canvas, two switches, switch one and switch two. And what I'm going to do is we're going to configure connect these switches, right? And when you're connecting like devices, you will use a crossover cable. So I'm going from gigabit one and switch one to gigabit one and switch two. Again, I'll do the same thing, gigabit two with a crossover cable, and gigabit two from switch one to gigabit two on switch two. Awesome. Let me just fast forward this a little bit here so that just to speed the process along a little bit. I guess that was not it. Let me just stop the simulation. All right, let's wait until spanning tree does its thing. All right, there we go. All right, so you will notice, and I just set this at an angle so you could see it. You notice there, a gigabit one is green, gigabit two is green, gigabit one over here is green, gigabit two is amber. And that means there's a technology called spanning tree. And spanning tree is saying, hey, I am seeing a loop in this network. And the loop that it's seeing, if you were to send a frame along gigabit one over to switch two, it would just bounce back and come across gigabit two to switch one and then back across. So a continuous loop will be there. So spanning tree is a technology that creates a loop-free topology in a physically looped network, right? So, but we don't want that. What we want in this case, we're saying is if we were to create what's called a logical interface, right? It's called a port channel. So spanning tree will no longer see gigabit one and gigabit two as two separate physical interfaces, but rather one logical interface. Then we will be able to leverage both links at the same time. But as it is right now, as you can see, the one that is amber will not be passing traffic. It'll be in a blocking state, and we could take a look at it. So let me pull up this switch, and I'm going to go to the command line interface, as you could see here. And once I do so, let's configure this. Enable config T. I'm going to name it host switch one, and I'm going to save it. If I were to do show spanning tree VLAN 1, look at what's showing up. It's showing up both interface, gigabit 1 as forward in, gigabit 2 as forward in. Let's go over to switch 2, and we're going to try to do the same thing over here. Okay, let me just do on top so it stays on top. Go to the command line interface. I'll get out of full screen mode, and I will try to break this out here. So if it's audio, ought to not do it. Do enable config T. Host name is going to be switch.02 or switch 2, right? And I'm saving the configs. Again, if I were to go here and do show spanning tree VLAN 1, right, then I should be able to see where it's gigabit 1 is forward in, gigabit 2 is blocking. Okay, so that's what we're seeing there. All right, so, a lot of interesting stuff going on here. All right. All right, guys. So, so here you see, again, if we look at the topology, we could see that gigabit 2 is in blocking mode and gigabit 1 is in forward in mode. Okay. So let's continue through this config. So right now, what we're going to do, we're going to create an Etherchannel. So what it will do, it will combine the port speed of gigabit 1 and gigabit 2 and present it as if it were one logical port. How do we do that? Okay, so we're going to go in global config. So to go in global config, we'll type config T. And, once we do that, we're going to say interface range. I wish I knew how to type, but interface range GI 01-2. And I'm going to shut the interfaces, right? When I shut the interfaces, I'm now going to say channel group 1. This is my port channel 1, my first logical interface. It's going to be called logical interface 1. And this is where you do the question mark. I'm saying mode. And we're going to do active, right? I'm going to use LACP. LACP is industry standard, which is Link Aggregation Control Protocol. PAGP is Cisco proprietary, and it's port aggregation protocol. Okay, so we're going to do active. And once we do active, notice it created a logical interface, and this logical interface is called port channel 1. Now, we could actually take a look at this if we were to go show IP interface brief and do, just do that. Notice the first one that pops up here is our port channel, even though it's down right now because obviously we shut it down. Let's go to switch to config T interface range gigabit 0/1.2. Okay, if I do show IP interface brief, right, and I do enter, notice there are no port channel here because we haven't created that logical interface yet. Again, let's get into this, and we're going to shut this port, this down, and we're going to say we're going to create a channel group. So channel group 1 mode active. Now, notice again, if we do show IP interface brief, and I were to do, notice now you will see that port channel that we created, right? Awesome stuff. So with that said right there, I could also now, if I wanted to use this as a trunk port, I could also, configure that, but I'm going to do that in a little bit later. So now let's bring these interfaces back online. And this is how we do it. We're going to say no shut. And we're going to say over here, no shut. And once we do no shut, the port channel is going to come up. And once it comes up, let's see what happens. Right. Right. And it's actually on its way up, right? No shut over here. It's on its way up, guys. All right. So, and we're going to see once it's fully up, both links are going to be green. We're not going to have one being amber anymore and 3 green, right? We're not going to have any in blocking mode. And also, I'm going to go back to spanning tree. Notice when I run spanning tree for the first time, right here, we were seeing it, identifying gigabit 1 and gigabit 2 separately. And over here, we're seeing the same thing, right? I like to show and tell. Sometimes my wife thinks that I over-exemplify, but I think it's necessary for us to do that right now. So you see gigabit 1 and gigabit 2. Gigabit 2 was showing as blocking, and gigabit 1 was actually showing as forwarding, right? So, as it boots up, let's just exercise a little patience there. But if we take a look here and do show spanning tree VLAN 1, notice, voila, we are only seeing reference to that logical interface that we created. We're no longer seeing that spanning trees identifying them as 2 separate physical ports. It's identifying it as one logical port. So if that were true, then it will not see any, it will not see a physical loop anymore. So as a result, there's no reason to block it, right? By the way, in an Etherchannel, you can bundle as many as 8 ports, right? 8 ports can be in the link, and they all have to be at the same speed. So you cannot combine 100 megs and 1 gigs. You could say 8 1 gigs or 4 1 gigs or 6 1 gigs, whatever number you want, or 8 100 and or 5 100s, but you can't combine 100s with gigs. All right. If I were to go back over here too, if you notice before I hit enter there, we saw here where it was actually identifying gigabit 01 and gigabit 02 separately. So if we were to go down now, by the way, to get out of this interface config mode, what we could do is just do Control Z, and that will take us back. And if I do show span entry VLAN 1, notice it's only showing that logical interface, right? So this is, we can also do show Etherchannel summary, and it tells us that, hey, we have an Etherchannel going on here. We're using logical interface port channel 1. And by the way, the S, the large S, means that it's a layer 2 port, and U means that it is in use, right? And it's using the link aggregation control protocol, which is LACP, which is IEEE standard. And it's also using the ports that are part of this Etherchannel is gigabit 01 and gigabit 02. So the entire, all the information about the Etherchannel is showing up here. By the way, P, if you look here, it means that these ports are in the port channel, right? And if we go over to switch 2 and do the same thing, so we do show Etherchannel, right, group, Etherchannel summary, pardon me, and we hit enter, we see that all that information that's there. Now we can now say, you know what? So before what we had 2 gigabit ports, 2 1 gig ports. And what it was actually doing, it was using one and leaving the other one for insurance. So therefore, if gigabit 1 were the active ports and gigabit 2 were the port that's on standby, when gigabit 1 goes down, the network would reconverge. And after the reconvergence, what it will actually do is now fail over to port 2. But what we're doing here, we're taking advantage of both ports, right? So with us taking advantage of both ports, if one port were to die, it will still continue to function. You might have a degraded state or degraded performance on your network, but at least you'll have service continuity. Now, if we were to say, hey, you know what, let's talk about a different kind of ports that we have, right? So we have an access port and we have a trunk port. What is an access port? An access port is a port that is configured to carry traffic for a single VLAN. What is a trunk port? A trunk port is a port that is configured to carry traffic for multiple VLAN. Right now, as we are, this port channel, by the way, is not configured as a trunk port. Let's take a look. So we could do show interface port channel 1, and let's do, let me just see port. Let's do this, show interface port channel 1. Right, and then what if I were to, that's not taken in here. All right, so look at what it's showing as. It's showing up as a 2 gig port, right? So it's seen it as a single 2 gig port rather than 2 separate 1 gig ports. So now it looks like one single 2 gig ports. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to go into interface global config. We're going to go interface port channel 1, and we're going to do the same thing in switch 2, interface port channel 1. And what we could do here now, we could say switch port mode, we want it to be a trunk port. It probably might bomb. Yes, I thought it would. So what's going on here? This is an older version of the operating system. You first have to tag it to how it's going to be encapsulated. So what I might want to do here is to say switch port trunk encapsulation .1Q, which is IEEE standard, and then we say switch port mode trunk. Voila. Now let's go over here. Switch in. So we're still in port channel. We say switch port trunk encapsulation .1Q. Switch port mode trunk. Okay. So here we are. Now we will see exactly what happens when it comes back up. We could actually shut this interface and then do no shut and just watch it, come up. Guys, for more interest in lab, I encourage you to visit us at www.networkacademyonline.com, where we'll have plenty of labs for you to really check out. Let me kind of bring that website up for you so you can see it, www.networkacademyonline. And I will just pull that screen across in the video so you could see it. So here we are, www.networkacademyonline, and you could scroll through, and there you'll have all the courses that we have recorded so far, and we'll continue to add courses, for your viewing and for your educational purposes. Okay, so I'm gonna go back, and I will take a look at the configs again. So now, if I were to go Control Z, show interface trunk, I can now see that port 1, which the logical port channel 1, is actually configured as a trunk, right? All VLANs are allowed across it, and we're using 802.1q as our encapsulation method. Again, let's do it here, show interface trunk, and we will see the same thing. So with that said, if I were to create a VLAN here on switch 1, config T, VLAN 10, we might name that VLAN student. All right, and let's do that. If I go do show VLAN brief, right, I see where I have my VLAN 10, which is student, and all ports right now are in VLAN 1, and I could show here, show VLAN brief. Notice there are only the default VLANs, VLAN 1 and VLAN 102 to 105. I go in global config and I could type VLAN 10, and I could say, name student, right? Again, if I were to go back, do show VLAN brief, notice my VLAN 10 is there. Now, I could actually, I was going to show you how to configure an SVI to transport across the trunk, but I'll leave that for the next nugget, right? So what did we learn? We learned that when we physically connect ports on a switch, physically connect a switch in a looped mode, there's a technology called spanning tree that creates a loop-free topology for us. And we are saying that, hey, if we're connecting 2 physical ports on our switches, we want to maximize the use of those ports. By default, one is going to be in some of the ports are going to be in block state, and some are going to be in forwarding state. We want them to all be in forwarding states, right? Because we want to be able to leverage the bandwidth that's available to us. But by default, the technology doesn't allow us to do it. Now, there's another technology, which is called Etherchannel, that allows us now to say, hey, we're going to configure these interfaces, these bundles of interfaces, into one logical port, so that spanning tree will no longer see this as a few physical port, but rather one logical port, and there will be no blocking taking place, right? And you see that we configured Etherchannel. I did the show commands to show you, how it changes when you look at spanning tree from the physical ports to the logical ports. I also did a show interface on the logical port that shows you how it combines the interfaces and presents them as one large, logical port, showing one, instead of showing each 1 gig port, it does present it as, one logical 2 gig ports, right? And I also showed you how we could now convert that logical ports that we did into a trunk port. One last thing before we go is I am going to go show run. And once I do show run, and I'll go down to the port that we configured, notice this is the logical port, the port channel interface. And we go down to gigabit 1 and 2. Notice all these configs here. I didn't type this underneath the gigabit interface. I typed it on the port channel interface, but it took effect on the ports that are part of the port channel. So you noticed here. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been informative for you. My name is Norwin Phillips, and again, this is another nugget from Network Academy Online. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I encourage you to visit our website at www.networkacademyonline.com and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next nugget. Bye now.